The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
The Fold is brought to you by oMedia, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. No mai hoki mai ki a The Fold, e mihi nei ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. My guest today is Jo Norris, the Chief Content Officer at Stuff, and we're sort of rush releasing this because it's the conversation happens out the back of their huge announcement yesterday, which is the launch of 3 regional paywalled mastheads in the Press, the Waikato Times, and the artist formerly known as the Dominion Post, now just known as the Post. And this is a really, I mentioned this in the conversation, but this is a huge historic moment for Stuff as an organisation, which has roots that stretch back more than 150 years in this country, and has always, up to this point, charged for access to its regional journalism and delivered that distributionally through print formats. Now it's doing the same for the digital formats. It's late to the party, like the big international mastheads that are furthest along in this race are at least a decade down this road, and even locally the Herald is pretty much bang on 4 years ahead, and has done pretty well. And with these things, like the reason why the best time to have launched it is as long ago as possible is because you learn a lot. So they are late, but that does not mean it won't work. And while there have been rumours flying around about this for a little while, and at one point I heard that they were going to launch as many as 10 different regional mastheads, which I think would have been potentially a quite confused and hard to manage proposition. The way this has rolled out, and I think that there is just a logic to it, and even down to the sort of look and feel, and the fact that these will be brand new sites that house this content. This won't be a reskin of the current Stuff website. So, Stuff is, I think, and I'm sure they would acknowledge, not had the greatest kind of hygiene with its digital properties lately. So I think, to know that these 3 properties are going to be new and sort of optimized for the kind of current technological best practice, I think will work well for them. So this episode really is me drilling into the sort of fine detail of how this will operate and what the thinking is that drove it. Jo is one of my favourite people to talk to in journalism. She's a former editor of the Press, spent a long time working for the Dominion and then the Dominion Post, so understands actually in a very deep level the relationship with between a regionally defined publication and the community which it serves. So just the perfect person to be driving this. And, as much as anything, you just have to admire anyone in this era who's taking a bold and differentiated swing into a media market. Whether it works or not, that's kind of, time will tell. Time will tell. But at the very least, they've really thought hard about it and to be through the sort of rumour swirling and into the actual launch of these things tomorrow is a really exciting position to be in. So we talk about that and then detour a little bit into sort of her why for journalism and some of the things that she's sort of learned and some of the really big roles she's had over the last 10 years. It's a real newsy one. It's a real journalism one. If you're into that kind of thing, I think you'll get a lot out of it. So this is Jo Norris, Chief Content Officer for Stuff on The Fold. Tēnā koe, Jo, and welcome to The Fold.
Kia ora, Duncan. Thank you for having me.
I'm so pleased you could make the time. This obviously a huge day, not just for the year, but this is a historic day for Stuff. Do you want to start by maybe just kind of talking us through, in your words, what it was you announced last night at Parliament, of all places?
Yeah, look, thank you, Duncan. It's really great to be able to finally talk about this publicly. For more than a year, we've been really thinking through how we want to continue to connect with our subscribers across the country in a way that's really relevant to them and to their lives. And so yesterday, we were really pleased to be able to announce that we will be launching digital mastheads for some of our really strong heritage publications and the newspapers that are really beloved by our readers and subscribers across the country. So we've launched digital mastheads for the press, which is obviously a really strong South Island publication, for the Waikato Times, which covers Waikato and the Bay of Plenty, and for the Post, which is the new name for the paper of the capital, formerly known as the Dominion Post.
And, this is you're relatively late to the paywall concept prior to now, and you had a sort of fairly similar model to our membership model, voluntary subscriptions, which works to a point, but is harder to operate, I think, at the scale at which Stuff operates. Why was it that it took you so long to kind of get to this point, and what sort of prompted this particular approach to it?
Yeah, we were very careful because we wanted to take an approach that we knew would work for our existing audiences and would help us maintain that really live, bold, spirited and nationally relevant journalism that we publish every day on Stuff, and to make sure that continues to be as accessible to as many people as possible, including audiences that are not necessarily able to access paid content. But we also wanted to make sure that we did have a different type of subscriber offering for our existing subscribers and those who want to subscribe to our products and to receive it in a format that's relevant to them. So we looked very carefully at models around the world. We also looked at what was working locally and what wasn't working locally, and made sure that as we do this, we do that in a considered way. And we talked to our subscribers as well. So we spend a lot of time researching, talking to people who already pay us for content to make sure that when we did go to market, it was something that was relevant to them.
I mean, it's quite an interesting approach you've taken, and in some ways it's the inverse, or it's certainly like it's a different approach to the Herald's Premium, where they put their big sort of national bold-faced name reporters behind the paywall and other forms of content in front of it. Regional news or kind of regionally targeted news is considered one of the tragedies of the internet era. What makes you confident that you'll succeed with this approach, where you keep the sort of the big national stories free and in front of the paywall, but have more kind of regionally specific ones behind it?
Yeah, what you'll see, Duncan, across Stuff and across our mastheads is increasingly differentiated content. So content that is very much in the tone of Stuff that we know that our national audience respond to, and then content that is really relevant to both local audiences but also topic audiences. So the Post, for example, will be strongly focused on politics, on business and information that people need to understand nationally that comes from the capital. Whereas the content that we'll be publishing into the press will be very much focused on the South Island, and people already pay us for that content. We know the demand is there. We've got a very, very strong subscriber base in the South Island for the press currently, but we do know that people want options beyond print. And so we have a high level of confidence that there will be existing subscribers who will choose to opt in for the digital subscription, but also new subscribers who have told us they want to subscribe and that we need to give them some options.
Looking at the Post particularly, with the announcement, you made reference to that gallery team, which is, you could always argue these things, but certainly in the running for maybe the best in the country. And that coverage has been a real bedrock of the Stuff site. Is that now going to go behind the paywall of the Post, or how will you or will there be some kind of ratio of it that sits in front of the paywall at Stuff? Like, how will you manage the kind of complexities of the sort of national versus Wellington specificity of that group?
Yeah, one of the benefits we have is that we have obviously Stuff has been going for more than 20 years. We've got really deep insights into our audience and the kind of content that our audience expects. And what that allows us to do is to start to understand the type of political content that the Stuff audience wants to consume, and then the type of content that will work in a more lean back format, which will be our print edition and our digital edition of the Post. So you'll see deeper analysis, the kind of content that you want to read on a second day of a story that's broken during the previous day. And one of the examples I've been using in the last couple of days, just simply because it's live, is a midday press conference around tax reform, for example. Obviously breaks, that will be published immediately on Stuff with our team of gallery reporters covering that, or if it's announced in Auckland, our Auckland team. The next day, readers expect to understand more context, more analysis, and have an opportunity to review some of the content that they perhaps didn't have time to during the day. Because while people like you and I are constantly, every day, all day, clicking to refresh hundreds of times per day, not everybody has the opportunity to do that. And so they need to receive the content in a format that works for them.
So, in terms of will these publications sort of start with existing subscriber bases, i.e. will this be sort of bundled for free with the existing print subscriptions?
Yeah, so the pricing plan is that if you are an existing subscriber to one of our newspapers for more than 5 days per week, then you'll receive all access to our digital subscriptions as part of that package. If you're not a subscriber, why not, firstly? But secondly, there are some people who are not, then they have an option to opt in straight away. And we've got introductory pricing for those people and the long-term pricing plans as well.
What are those pricing plans?
So the introductory offer is $1.99 per week for a new digital subscriber, and that's a 16-week offer, and then they would move on to the standard pricing, which is $5 per week. If they want to subscribe to the entire network, which is the 3 publications at this stage, then that would be $7.50 a week.
So that, in terms of the sort of structure of the pricing, puts you above the New Zealand Herald's offering. What makes you sort of confident that you can achieve that premium, especially in thinking about the Waikato Times and like a sort of a smaller market potentially, which does have some crossover with that big monster up the motorway?
Yeah, we're really competitive in that particular market. The Waikato Times outperforms the Herald in the Waikato market because it produces content that's relevant to Waikato people, and we know that's of value to them. And it's also content that they can't get anywhere else. We have a number of national platforms operating in New Zealand that all compete with one another, some free, some paid. But in the markets where we have existing subscriber bases, we are very, very strong, and we know that content is of value to people. How
important is this to Stuff's future? Is the not just the launch of it, not just the symbolism of it, but the actual financial success of it to the kind of future of this company?
Oh, look, I really love this question. This is a really important part of our strategy. We have always known that we would want to at some point move to a point where we had this option available to subscribers, and we have a mix of revenue, which means that we are a long-term sustainable company, but it's important that we do continue to diversify and that we grow our revenue from digital subscribers.
And do you have a sort of expectations in terms of what's a number you'd like to have by the end of the year in terms of not just sort of porting across your existing print subscribers, but sort of brand new digital subscribers across the network?
Yeah, we're not going to talk about numbers publicly at this stage, but obviously you don't go into an endeavour like this with the level of investment required without having targets. So we do have targets. We are really aspirational around this. But it's important to note that we have a large subscriber base now, so we feel really comfortable that people are prepared to pay for our content. It's worth paying for. It's great journalism. We've got more journalists than any other company across New Zealand, and we know that that's of value to people, and that our journalism is valued.
So just to kind of, not to get too technical on it, but I do think these things are sort of material to how it will interact with the existing traffic gusher that is stuff. Because what you're trying to create is essentially new behaviour patterns, which is that rather than just going to stuff, what will the new URLs be, incidentally, just before I...
So we've got the press.co.nz, the post.co.nz and waikatotimes.co.nz. If anybody types in any of the URLs that we've used across our history, they will be redirected and they'll end up in the right place. So your question, I think, is around what will the interaction look like? And I think the really important point is that we would love people to be using both stuff.co.nz all day, every day with that live, dynamic, always-on content, and then the more reflective, additionalised content that will appear in their masthead. So this is not an either-or. We really think that this is an offering that if you want to stay informed in New Zealand and across the news and understanding the stories behind the news, then this is a great option for you.
So, for example, like one of the things that the Herald does is uses its front page as a kind of effectively a sales tool to push towards not just premium, but also its sort of sub-brands, the likes of Viva and One Roof and so on. Stuff does that to an extent with Ensemble, but will this also kind of, will you see, or you be able to use... If you're a full noise subscriber, will you ultimately be able to use the Stuff homepage to navigate towards the big stories through on the subsites?
Yeah, so our user journeys will be different from our competitors, and that's partly because we didn't want that dynamic where you have a site that becomes one thing in front of the wall and another behind the wall. It can be quite confusing for users, so we've deliberately made these separate sites with different experiences, and you subscribe to the subscriber product because you understand that product and that's what you want. And I think that takes away some of the schizophrenia that can occur in front of a paywall when you're trying to do both jobs with one site. Are
you concerned about creating new behaviour patterns? Like we've come out of an era where distribution was kind of a relatively solved problem between search and sort of link forward social. It was relatively easy to acquire a new audience, and we're lucky we launched the spin-off when we did, because to try and find the kind of cheap to free traffic that built our audience now would be quite difficult if you're not using stuff to prompt to particular stories as opposed to the broad brand messaging. Are you at all concerned about trying to create new behaviour patterns in quite a different internet era dynamically?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a leap of faith when you launch what is a new experience for people, but keeping in mind these are not new brands. So these people have had a relationship with these brands for more than 160 years. There is no bigger brand in Christchurch or the South Island than the Press. It's very deeply understood. So there's no awareness problem that we're trying to tackle here. And it's just simply encouraging people to follow a slightly different user journey. And the other thing that's probably important to note is that people have been typing in dompost.co.nz for a long, long time. Press.co.nz has existed for more than 15 years. So this will, and that will take people to the destination that we want them to end up on, which is these new websites.
Are these brand new websites, or do they have a relationship to the kind of current Stuff platform in terms of the look and feel?
They're brand new websites with a new look and feel, and we're really looking forward to people seeing them for the first time.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, because as I mentioned before we got on, I think there's DesignWorks have done a fantastic job with the sort of updated but still kind of heritage-touching aspects of the new mastheads.
Yeah, look, it was really important to us that this did reflect the heritage of these brands, and these are newspaper brands, and people understand newspapers. People who are old like me have had newspapers as part of their lives, from the time we were born. So it was really important that we didn't throw away that legacy.
Now, just turning to, there are a bunch of major sort of daily and kind of important regional newspapers which aren't captured by these kind of big three that you've singled out. I saw Tim Murphy saying that they were going to sort of be rebranded as a sort of a Southland Stuff, not a Stuff Southland. For example, what is happening to those publications in print and digital formats?
Yeah, so our print formats are unchanged. We're still thinking through the phasing of the rollout of further products, and we will let people know as soon as we're able to talk to them about the timing of further rollouts. But very much looking at some further announcements over the next few months.
So it's possible that there might actually be, further regionalised brands to roll out attached to some of those kind of historic mastheads.
Yeah, so like our metro brands, we do have, again, a strong subscriber base in a number of regions outside the three main metro centres.
Right. How much consideration was there given to putting a paywall around stuff itself? It's interesting to me that, given that, obviously there are a whole bunch of different sort of pay models around, but the sort of soft paywall is probably the most common internationally, where you have a single brand and one or two stories free, and then you hit the wall and people play with the meter to see how many stories you get free before you start to have to pay. And Stuff is just such a big, established, popular brand that contains all of your regionals. But how much consideration did you give towards actually going down that path as opposed to this kind of, certainly more challenging or more innovative model?
We have looked at all of the options, and as you rightly say, that is a model that exists internationally, but internationally there are also other really successful models around digital subscriptions for even very, very small regional communities, which work really effectively because people value the very specific niche content that is within those products. So that's the option we opted for. We put a lot of thought into all of the alternatives, and we continue to. So we've been quite clear, we never say never around a paywall for Stuff, but it's certainly not within our consideration at this point.
I do actually want to talk about some other things and your career, but just one last question on that, on the sort of specificities of how this will function. Will the regional titles essentially have a bundle of journalists attached to them who largely write exclusively for those titles, or will there be essentially a sort of sorting mechanism whereby, for example, some of your national correspondents might actually end up writing both exclusively for some of the regional titles where they happen to be based, but also national stories? And how will you sort of resolve things where they are tightly tied regionally, but there is a big national interest in them, as is so frequently the case with stories? Yeah.
We've had a lot of these types of questions over the last 24 hours, and the answer is a mixture of the two. So there will be some journalists who write almost exclusively for their home masthead, as you put it, and that they are people who we know that our subscribers really strongly relate to and are prepared to pay for their content because it's journalism that they value. There'll be others whose content is also valued, but we also see benefit in putting it in front of the paywall effectively. And I'm thinking of someone like our fantastic climate editor, Eloise Gibson, who writes really strong public interest journalism that we think is really appropriate for that large audience that we get to stuff.co.nz.
And the regional space is sort of suddenly kind of getting a bit spicier in the sense that Peter Newport and Tim Marden recently announced a quite ambitious-sounding network, which feels very early stage, but claimed to have the support of Minister Jackson and the opposition broadcasting spokesperson Melissa Lee. Part of the sort of raison d'etre of the new RNZ funding is supposedly to kind of dial up the regions. Firstly, have you received or sought any kind of support from government associated with this move, and how would you look upon the idea of potentially one or more kind of entities pouring resource into something that you're now attempting to charge for and potentially either giving it away for free in RNZ's case or creating competing products out of thin air with government support?
We've watched both initiatives with interest. We, as a general rule, it would be interesting public policy for the government to fund or either directly or indirectly a competitor to compete with the private sector. It would be an interesting evolution, and we would watch that with interest. We know, having operated in regional New Zealand for more than 150 years in many regions, that it is there can be challenges in terms of creating sustainable models. But we're very much committed to the regions. We've got journalists in all of our newsrooms in the regions, as well as a combined regional team that supports them. And I think, we're really optimistic that we'll be able to continue to operate in that way.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today.
I wondered if you could start, and this will be quite a gear shift from the intricacies of the new products, but just tell me why you personally were kind of hauled into journalism in the first place.
Oh gosh, that's such an interesting question. These are definitely much harder questions, Duncan.
Sorry.
I'm just casting my mind back. I think I always came from a arts background, and was really encouraged by my family to think about society. We had, my father was a deeply creative person, and both of my parents had a strong interest in community and society generally. So I think I did an English degree, started a music degree, and then started to think, well, gosh, none of these seem to be leading to really strong careers. So journalism was probably something I fell into, and because it was a natural confluence of all of those things. But as soon as I started training, I trained at what was then AIT in Auckland. It just felt really right. And I think probably I'm just a naturally curious person. I love hearing people's stories. Like many journalists who start their careers in print, I'm an introvert, but I like to absorb information and then distill and synthesize that. So, and it hasn't got boring. And here we are more than 2 decades later. So.
And in terms of these new products, there's a bit of a connection there, in that you were editor of the press, I think the deputy or associate editor of the Post, or what is now known as the Post. What do you because I feel like there are things that, whether it's journalists or people who've only worked at more national publications, wouldn't understand about the relationship of a geographically defined community to a publication. What came out of those roles for you?
Oh, that's such a beautiful question. You're right. I started my career at what was the Dominion, and I remember I was, young, just 20, I think, and I was catching the bus one day down from Karori down to our office in Bulcott Street, and I was just like a kid, and I felt like I hardly knew anything about the world. And there was a person sitting opposite me who I took to be a businessman, and he was reading the Dominion, and he was reading my story. And it was the strangest experience for me to realise the power that journalists have to inform their community. And here was this man at a different life stage, different set of life experiences, being informed by the work that I did. And that, that travel has travelled right throughout my career, where I've been really aware that the decisions we make as journalists in the story selection, the range of sources that we speak to, that actually has a direct impact, and you can see that impact straight away. And when I became the editor of the press in 2012, it was immediately after the earthquakes. The city was still rocking. Our building in the centre of Christchurch was one of the few that was occupied, and around us was rubble. There were still tanks on the corners preventing people coming into different parts of the CBD. And just that period, that 5-year period, was just incredible, where we were covering every day this incredible heartbreak, the community trying to recover, people who had recovered and wanted to move on from the quakes, and those that were still profoundly impacted. And that was just one of the greatest privileges of my life, to be able to work deeply in that community and to work alongside it for that period. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Duncan, but working deeply in a community, there is no greater privilege for a journalist, and I'm still really feel very, very strongly about the power of local journalism.
No, that absolutely answers my question. And in some ways, what I'm curious about is that you're a journalist who also went from that position at the press to lead Christchurch NZ, which is a sort of a regional development and events type organisation that exists at most councils. And in so doing, you are part of, you're at the head of an organisation that is actually heavily scrutinised by and interacts with journalism in a way that I think a lot of lifer journalists, even those that go into a comms role, they don't you would have a very specific experience of, flipping to a different perspective on what's covered. Like, what did you kind of learn about journalism from being on the other end of it for quite a high profile role for a period of time?
Yeah, well, it was fascinating going from creating the news to being in the news, and because Christchurch NZ at that time was a new agency, we were being set up with a specific purpose. We were really high profile, and I also had the quite funny experience where my former colleagues at that time, who are now my colleagues again, were really interested in what I was doing, and so I became quite newsworthy for a while. And it was an interesting experience, and again, I think it reinforced that point that I made earlier, that the things that we do as journalists have a real impact, and sometimes the impact is not immediately seen. And I often like to remind our journalists that sometimes when you throw a grenade, you need to be prepared to see what the impact is. You can't just walk away and expect to have no accountability for the impact of your stories. What I did see as a consequence of that role is just how powerful news brands are. And there would be a discussion in almost every room I would be in of what if this ended up on the front page of the press. And I'd always laugh to myself thinking, well, it's probably not going to, because there's no one from the press here. But yeah, this is not newsworthy, please. And also to give some of my colleagues in local government the context that actually a news story is not the end of the world. It actually can be really important to get these things out there. And the news cycle's quick, and as long as you're transparent and open and honest, that actually that's the best way to influence a positive outcome and understanding with the public. So it was quite nice to be able to influence from the inside to some extent. But local government is certainly a very special environment, and I have the greatest respect for the people who choose to work there. But I'm certainly pleased to be back in the media.
What was it that drew you back ultimately?
Look, I think it was an opportunity to take the role that I now have at Stuff, which is an incredible role. Chief Content Officer is really, I think, one of the very best jobs in the country. I get to work with incredible journalists, but also as part of an executive team that's really innovative. We're really willing to try things, as you can see with the announcements we've made in the past couple of days, and a really deep respect for the work that Sinead has done, both pre and post the MBO, and the courageous decisions that she's prepared to make. And
how's it been? This is sort of related to the Christchurch question, and that there's a new media reporter in town, Shane Curry, just a cub, earning his stripes, who's quite enjoyed in a very kind of way that's certainly at times looks helpful to the Herald's kind of business interests, reporting on some aspects of what's going on at Stuff that would be under your purview, thinking of Gongate, but also the sort of leaks around the paywall. How does that sort of make you feel, because obviously like part of journalism is you do thrive on leaks, but you want to feel like your organisation is all kind of tied together, and leaks are on some level a suggestion that there are divided loyalties, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, how's that sort of sat with you, especially at a time when you're building towards something that is really epochal for the organisation?
Yeah, the fold listeners can't see. I'm smiling right now. It is an irony, isn't it, that, as you say, journalists rely on leaks. We do encourage it of others, and we do receive leaks and act on information where we think it's newsworthy. Look, I'm a realist and a pragmatist. Journalists are inherently curious. They're inherently gossips. It is disappointing when people leak commercially sensitive information to our competitors, but I'm also a realist that it happens from time to time. My preference is, and I've said this to the team, is that if they are going to leak material, they leak it to our own journalists, and that we have the opportunity to cover stories that are newsworthy first. And I would never prevent a journalist from covering a story that was newsworthy, that was about us. I completely accept that I and my executive colleagues are fair game, and that our journalists should be reporting on issues. So look, Duncan, I don't sweat this stuff. It happens. It's my preference that it doesn't. But and I think probably the other part of that question is where our competitors choose to report on us. I think I would encourage them to make sure that they're doing it, again, for the right journalistic reasons, and not simply to further the interests of their shareholders or their owners, and that they're actually doing it because it's genuinely newsworthy, out of respect for their readers.
Yeah.
I can see you're smiling now.
Well, I mean, like, some of the stuff is like, it's not newsworthy, but it's quite fun, and you know it's you can see how sometimes these things get caught up, but at the time they must be stressful. I'm very conscious that I've taken up quite a lot of your time, but I've just got a couple more questions. My friend Rebecca, who runs Ensemble, asked me to ask about it, which is a publication.
Hi, Rebecca.
Just basically reader requests here, but that is a publication that staff bought probably, I think, 18 months ago now, and seems to be really hitting its straps. How the Herald's recently put a paywall around Viva. I couldn't guess as to how that's going for them financially, but how are some of those kind of not geographically defined brands like Ensemble, like Sunday, like the Forever Project, how do they interact, and how does Stuff see its relationship with some of those kind of different mastheads interacting with this project and with their kind of longer term strategic goals?
Yeah. Well, the Ensemble question in particular is probably one for Rebecca to answer directly. But look, Ensemble's a great brand. I absolutely love the work that the team do there. Really on point. They really deeply understand their audience. They do have a membership program that supports Ensemble, which is obviously part of the Stuff stable. With respect to the other vertical brands, we're looking very carefully at what the opportunities are around those. They are strong, commercially led advertising vehicles, so we need to be really mindful of that they are very important to our commercial partners.
Sure.
That we create the right environments that people can advertise around. Whether they have revenue opportunities, we'll continue to evaluate that as we move across the next 12 and 24 months.
And finally, unlike certain other large media entities in our industry, we, as in the spin-off and Stuff, are both still party to the collective bargaining with the technology giants. I wondered if you could kind of give an update on how those are tracking post the minister's announcements in December.
Yeah, I think, as you point out, we are part of the collective, so that is one for the collective to answer as a whole, rather than us as an individual member. But it is really important that we do move towards concluding a settlement with the platforms. But we also consider it to be really important that the government legislates to ensure that everybody gets a fair go, whether they are part of the collective that we have formed or whether they are smaller entities or other entities who have chosen not to be part of the collective. It's really important that the platforms pay for the content that we pay to produce and that we do in the public interest. And for there to be any other resolution than that would be grossly unfair. And would exacerbate the existing disproportionate power base that those platforms hold.
Beyond being unfair, how crucial is it to the financial sustainability of journalism? Do you think that that there is some kind of compensation basis achieved? That mirrors what's happened in Australia to some extent.
Yeah, it is part of the solution, Duncan. I mean, I think any of us would be unwise to wholly rely on third parties for our ongoing future sustainability. And there are a lot of other dynamics at play. AI and ChatGPT have profoundly shifted the dynamic further, and they're issues that we're really thinking through quite deeply. So I think your question is it this or nothing, and this is just part of the revenue picture for us, but it is an important part. But as you've seen with what we've announced in the last couple of days, we've very much got other strings to our bow.
Just finally, seeing as you raised a final, what do you make of the rise of generative AI and the likes of ChatGPT? I see that Business Desk have already introduced a kind of automated processing of NZX announcement, which looks like a very sharp use of it for them. Is Stuff experimenting in this space, and are you likely to see AI-generated products within the Stuff stable in the next little while?
Yeah, we're looking at the possibility of automation across a whole range of areas, not just content generation, but process iterations, process improvements, the way in which AI can make us as efficient as possible, because, again, that plays into the sustainability of long-term models. Using generative AI for content is not something that we are currently doing, but I think there are some applications that we will start to consider very, very quickly, things like headline writing, which just makes some of that kind of process work more efficient. The Business Desk experiment is an interesting one. It's one that a number of companies internationally have been using for quite some time, and it effectively is creating stories from data sources. I think there will be many, many more opportunities as the generative technology improves and it becomes more than it is currently. But we're watching very, very closely. We are starting to experiment in some areas, and I think that will be inevitable for all media companies.
Now, mihi, Jo, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with tomorrow. It's a huge day and an achievement to have got to this point. I wish you the best of luck in terms of the rollout from here.
Thank you so much, Duncan, and thank you to all of the listeners of The Fold. You're amazing. This podcast is amazing. I love listening every week, and it's lovely to finally have been asked.
It's been too long, but glad to have had you on. Thanks, Jo.
See you.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.